Welcome back to Partnerships Unraveled, the podcast where we unravel the mysteries about partnerships and channel on a weekly basis. My name's Alex Whitford. I'm the VP of Revenue here at ChannelX, and this week I'm very excited to welcome our special guest, Luxy. How are you doing?
I am doing really great, Alex. And let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for having me. I am so excited by this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. We spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about how SMB and channel and marketing, and you're someone through your various positions have owned a lot of that sort of strategy and execution. Maybe for the uninitiated, you could give us a little bit of a highlight reel in terms of what you've done.
Sure. I'll start by saying I've spent about 20 years, which always makes me feel a little older than I'm ready to admit. 20 years in both B2B and B2C marketing. I actually love going back and forth. And now I'd say I'm even in B2B to C marketing, mostly in tech. At the heart of who I am, I actually consider myself a scientist and a storyteller. A little bit of that started because early in my career I was in pharma. I actually graduated with an honors Bachelor of Science. I was going to be a dentist when I grew up. That's a whole other story for another day. But now, I get to combine some of my background with what I also love doing, which is creativity and storytelling. I love building teams. I love digging into data and insights and then turning that into stories that I would say drive action. One of the things that actually is funny, because we were just talking about this a little bit, I love building high performing, diverse teams that are just as passionate about marketing as I am.
Yeah, well, science and storytelling, I think that's one hell of a sort of subtitle what marketers end up doing, right? I think the science element is often missed in terms of that iteration and reiteration. One of the things we were discussing and I was getting far too nerdy and excited about in our prep call is where SMB marketing should sit. I think a lot in terms of B2B tech, it often is downstream of enterprise. And so that sort of means that some of the metrics and the performance criteria are sort of pulled from enterprise and ABM tactics, which sort of doesn't make much sense. And sometimes I see it upstream of consumer. Talk to me about how you see that blend coming together.
So let me start in it. And to your point, we did get into a little geek out conversation about this. And I know you feel similar is SMBs are unique. Right? They're a unique audience, and it's not necessarily about scaling the strategy from enterprise or moving it up from consumer. It's really about building intentionally for the SMB audiences based on their needs, right? And then meeting them where they are. And so, and a pragmatic example is, especially in tech, is they want business grade solutions, but they want it with the simplicity of a consumer. So how do we make technology approachable and really look at it from their needs, their outcomes they're looking to solve, and then talk to them in that language? Increasingly, the brand tone and voice, and this is back to storytelling, right? Brand tone and voice matters. And there was this really interesting stat that I remember seeing, and it said more than 60% of SMBs don't say that they feel like they're not being marketed to them in a way that resonates. So more than 60% of SMBs don't feel marketed in a way that resonates. So what a massive opportunity to get it right? And then again, so how do we talk to them in a way that is resonating with them? And I know this will segue into the next question, which is, well, then if you had to choose, right?
Yeah, well, I think we're always looking for efficiency, right? Which means we want to cannibalize from somewhere. What's your view in terms of if you had to cannibalize from enterprise or from consumer, which is a smaller jump?
Yeah. So, and again, I say this with a lot of love as someone that has done both. What I have found is for the marketers that have maybe just grown up in enterprise marketing, they tend to default to strategies that are familiar for enterprise, right? And so, I'll say two examples of where maybe you might get it wrong if you're looking at just through the enterprise lens, which is in enterprise, we know that it's long sales cycles and high touch sales motions, right? But here's another, by the way, I love data. So another data point, the average SMB sales cycle, it's 30 to 90 days. And so far shorter than the almost 12 months sometimes, right, in enterprise. And the SMB customer has completed about 70% of their journey digitally, right? So they're already researching and comparing and forming decisions through digital channels long before they even talk to sales. So if you kind of just look at those two stats, well, guess what that mimics? It mimics the consumer buyer, the consumer shopper. And I mean, just think about how you and I shop, right? And so I do think there is an advantage. And I'll say an advantage in applying more of the consumer marketing mindset into targeting SMBs
Yeah,
customers.
I couldn't agree more. I like the word intentionality, right? So I don't
Yeah.
think it's a copy paste job from consumer to SMB, but I think the analogy I always give is I've never spoken to an Apple sales rep in my life.
Right.
I've bought basically every product they make,
Hmm.
and that's because I'm a consumer of their marketing, and that informs my decision making. Also, then when I set up my own business, inform my decision making in terms of what I procured from a business perspective.
Yeah.
Um, because the IT buyer in a 30 to 50 FTE business is just a consumer, right? Whereas the IT buyer for a 30,000 business is not. It's a committee, there's a procurement process, there's a whole
Mm.
matrix organization designed to support those workflows. Um, and so, yeah, understanding and sort of starting where the customer wants to be met.
Yes.
And that is such a small jump, but there are obviously some very specific nuances that you need to add in there. One of the things that I think is really interesting in terms of channel organization and maybe
Mhm.
architecture is that many channel leaders come from a sales background,
Mhm.
which again, never spoken to an Apple sales rep. So do you think SMB channel leaders should come from marketing instead?
Um, I'm not cheating, but I'm going to say both. And the re- and then, you could force my hand, but hear me out. Um, I do believe SMB channel leaders could absolutely benefit from having marketing, but I would say marketing and sales, right? And my real life example, who would also be an amazing guest one day, is Andrew Sage. Andrew Sage is a phenomenal channel leader that I had the privilege of partnering at Cisco, and he spent several years in marketing, several years. And our partnership was probably one of the best partnerships I had with a sales leader. And I've had some great relationships, right? But it really came from a place of mutual trust, but also like really deep appreciation for the experience we both brought to the table. And ultimately, everything we did was anchored with being partner first and customer obsessed. And he did get it. So, yes, he had both. Now, having said that, he's probably a rare leader, a rare channel leader that had sales and marketing. So I would say in those situations, a great channel leader just ensures that these two functions are tightly aligned, right? Where together marketing and sales are operating with shared accountability, goals, and a unified go to market strategy. So if we can get that right, we're good.
Well, I hear great things about Andrew. You're not the first person on this podcast. So I think it starts with copy paste. How do we clone Andrew? But then, yeah, how do we understand the real value that each of those singular
Yeah.
departments can bring? One of the things that I've often talked about is that channel leaders often come up with the same program designs and the same
Yeah.
strategies. And it's because they come from the same background. And I don't mean geographically or economically. I mean, they sometimes are all born in distribution. They've come up through the same career ladder. They've seen a lot of the same
Yes.
programs with medal statuses that all work sort of similarly. And so, as you say, you pull from what you know. One of the things I found really interesting about your career is you've built sort of startup teams
Mhm.
within wider organizations. What are some of those leading principles that guide you from how you build a team, how you set up a culture, how you make sure you pull from those different
Yeah.
backgrounds?
So I'm going to ask that question, but you sparked an idea. And I know one of the things I said is, we might go back and forth. And when you were talking about, I mean, Alex, one of the things you should think about is creating a podcast where you bring sales and marketing together and actually have the banter between sales. Anyways, I'll leave that with you. But as you're talking
Excellent.
about that, I mean, what an amazing opportunity for someone like you who has an amazing voice in the industry to maybe help us bridge the sales and
I'm
marketing gap.
I'm now going to be half pondering what my next podcast program is going to
I've
look like.
already
So
distracted
I'm
you.
going to have to dial in, Luxy, make sure I'm not dribbling while I think about how what the next series looks like. But yeah, I definitely think I think there's so much to learn, and especially in SMB, the
Yes.
cohesion almost has to be more tight, right? I've seen great sales leaders who have been somewhat supported by marketing drive amazing business in enterprise. In consumer, I see great marketing leaders drive a huge amount of sales with almost no sales influence. But in SMB, that's really where that has to meet in the middle in a really
Yeah.
great way.
Huge
Interesting,
opportunity.
Luxy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, maybe I have to
Okay,
get
so
you back
I'll go
on.
back. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get back on track. Two leadership principles. I would say one leadership principle. I have two of them actually. One leadership principle that I really, really lean into is start with purpose, not process. Um, and to me, that is so incredibly important because as we sort of to your point on like how do we build great teams within teams, you got to start with understanding where the organization is today, where it needs to go. And in my case, how can my team uniquely contribute to that journey? And so, really starting with understanding from a perspective of like, what is the purpose we can play? And so, listening, whether that is internally across the business with other business units, but I would say definitely also then listening to, again, to the point of customers and partners, right? And so once we have that foundation, we can then, build the shared vision. We can define what success looks like, and then worry about the process. So again, so start with purpose, not process. The second, as we then get into building teams, is probably my second principle. It is hire for potential, not perfection. And one, it's probably because I give a lot of credit to where I am because of leaders that thought the same way and gave me opportunities based on my potential. And so I do the same thing. I look for leaders that are energized by ambiguity, that are going to complement each other around the leadership table. And, you and I talked a bit about that. Like, so you don't have the same thinking. You want to bring different perspectives. Um, and that really want to solve problems that don't have a playbook. And so, that's where I go next.
Yeah, I love that because I think I very warmly tell this story, but I got a job that I was far too junior to do at Zoom, running their distribution strategy for EMEA, and it really has influenced how I hire today, which is sort of, yes, where you are today matters, but where's your ceiling and how likely are you to get there? And I think what I really see is when you put that trust and direction into team members, they really sit there and go, okay, you've shown me this belief. That means I need that belief in myself. And then, great things happen from there. One of the things when you start to build those teams together and you're hiring on potential is you need to sort of sense for almost cultural markers, right? How are people developing themselves? How are people developing processes and programs to drive forward? What are some of those markers you look for?
Psychological safety, right? And I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means. And I'm not going to, try to get to like take this conversation in a completely different direction. But I'm such a huge believer in that because the idea of safe space is where you're going to unlock the best of innovation, creativity, and even like real collaboration. It's so incredibly important for us to make people feel empowered. I mean, even your example of being hired, I mean, you were empowered, you felt safe, obviously, right? And you probably made amazing things happen, right? And so, how do we create that safe space where people can be empowered to bring their full selves, challenge ideas, take those smart risks? And the most important, which honestly took me a long time to get to, is speak the uncomfortable truth. Right? Speak the uncomfortable truth. I've actually now been able to say to organizations and leaders, I'm not here to admire the problem. Most of the time, we know exactly what we need to do. We need to do something about it. And so, how do we start to create and have those uncomfortable truth conversations? So, I think that is incredibly important. And I would say the other thing is, and we've all been in that room where the same people always speak. And then there's that quiet person in the room that is brilliant, right? Or we don't even know how brilliant they are. And so my other thing is then create space, especially for the quiet ones in the room, to share their perspective, because sometimes you never know, your best idea may come from that person that was really quiet.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about safe spaces because I think one of the things when I hear that, lots of people jump to, oh, great, now I can't say anything. And what's funny is you said safe space and uncomfortable truth simultaneously, right? Which an old mentor of mine told me something, and even to this day, I use it as a mantra, but there's no balance in honesty, which is sometimes honesty is it's painful, right? It's uncomfortable. Now, honesty must be rewarded, which is if we are in a safe space, it means you trust in me that I'll be 100% honest, and I'll trust in you that you are going to be okay hearing 100% honesty, and that's what that collaboration really looks like. Because otherwise, you end up with these half truths and things unspoken, and that's not what innovation and collaboration comes from, right?
No, I wrote that down. I love that. No balance in honesty.
Yeah, it's something that maybe it's my Britishness and our unique ability to not say things completely openly, which I had certainly in the infancy of my career had a habit of doing. And he was like, "Look, if you think it's a bad idea, say it's a bad idea. Now, say it kindly, right? There's no need to be brutal about it. But if you don't agree, we have to have an environment where we can create wonderful conflict that ultimately is sort of progressive to what we're trying to achieve."
I love that. Sounds like a really great mentor.
He really is. One of the things that we were then geeking out on, because we had a very geeky prep call, was mentorship, and how it's played a big role in how you shape your teams, your leaders, your culture. What's the best piece of advice a mentor gave you that still influences and drives you forward today?
There's so many wonderful things that I've learned and have been mentored around. The one that sticks to me that I try to live by is the true impact of leadership isn't what you achieve, it's how you empower others to achieve. And that, to me, it really resonates because it's this concept that leadership is about lifting others. And you talked about this even in your own example with Zoom, right? It's unlocking other potential. And so for me, whether that's mentorship or sponsorship or inclusive leadership, I think when we empower others to shine, we're not just building great teams for today, but we're also building legacy. And I always say my job is done when I'm actually not needed. Right?
Yeah,
There are other leaders that can step in.
Yeah, I love this so much. There's a really good friend of mine. We've worked. He actually works at Janet's today, and he's always had this like, oh, do I want to be a manager, leader, or do I want to be an IC? He's one hell of a salesperson, so he's got lots of routes open to him. And I always sort of chuckle because I say, look, leadership is painful. It's so much extra work, so you have to find the rewarding feeling from the extra work that comes from when you're not the one scoring the goal, right? And if intrinsically that's not the thing that motivates you, don't worry, there's wonderful careers being an amazing IC, whatever function you do. But that really has to come from, do I want someone else? Do I want the assist rather than the goal? And if that's the case, then I really think intrinsically you're built for leadership. But yeah, that has to come with a certain level of humility, right? Where it's like, hey, my role is not to be at the front, it's actually to be at the back, or leading by example. And I think if you can find those, and really, if you're looking at your team and you're talking about who deserves the promotion to leadership, I often find in that meeting environment, it's not the one that talks the loudest, it's the one that gives space for the great idea, which I say now, recognizing the amount of times that I've probably spoken too much. But I think that if you see someone presenting space for the right idea to come to the front, that's exactly the person who should be in that leadership position. Which I think is wonderful.
That resonates so much. Two things that come to my mind immediately is leadership is the hardest job if you're doing it right. And when you talk about humility, I've often said out loud that I'm a work in progress leader. And right, because still figuring it out.
Yeah. I mean, anyone, whether it's the political climate at the moment, the economic climate at the moment, or leadership principles, anyone who says they've got a definitive answer is just wrong. And that's coming from the person who has a podcast as a profession. But yeah, I really think that, most of this is just honesty, even honesty in our own failings, insecurities, misunderstanding of the situation, misunderstanding of context. And then in that honesty, you just have to trust in your team that they are mature enough, grown up enough, trust you enough that, hey, we're going to get through this either way, right?
Agreed.
So you said intentionality when it came to building out SMB versus enterprise versus consumer, but you also described building your career with intentionality, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking about how you should push yourself forward. Looking back, what would you tell your younger self about trusting your instincts?
This is actually really personal as a question. As someone that, so I'm Canadian out here in Toronto. My parents are immigrants, so it's a great story over drinks. And again, as a woman in tech, it wasn't always the easiest. I have lots of stories like many others probably out there that can share. And so I would say to myself, trust that you belong. This role wasn't handed to you. It was earned through grit and resilience and results. You didn't get here by accident. And I think this is the one thing that's so important. I'm still figuring it out is you're not expected to lead like everyone else. And your perspective, young Luxy, especially when it challenges the status quo, is exactly what the room needs. Yeah.
I love that. I'm sort of again a different mentor of mine. He always used to talk me through, Alex, what does it bring and what does it take away? Because what I've really found from building a large now executive network on the back of this podcast is the most senior people typically I found are the one with the biggest insecurities, which is interesting, right? But I think the thing that comes from is, what does it bring you? Well, it makes you really driven to take that next mile, right? Push even harder, outwork the competition. And then what does it take? Even when you do all of that, you're still nervous that you don't quite belong. And a younger, less mature me would have not seen those two things as the same. But I just more and more understand the real importance of it wasn't given to you. You didn't luck out. You earned it. But there is a downside to earning it, which is maybe you didn't really feel like you deserve it, but that thing continues to push you forward. And so, I think there's real, again, humility and understanding where you've come from and also why you're here and where you're headed.
And I think, on the back of that is also, and I'm sure I'm not alone, and I'd love to know if this resonated with you as well, is we don't need to fit into leadership. Like, we don't need to fit into the examples of leadership that exist today. I think our role is to reshape what leadership could look like.
Yeah, I sort of, maybe I'm just slightly obsessed with the phrase, but there's just no balance in honesty, which is, I remember Ricky Gervais is an English comedian, writes lots of great shows. He wrote The Office. He talks a lot that he just writes programs that he wants to watch. And then the audience will come. So his job is not to create a show that an audience will like. His job is to create his show. I think the same is true of leadership, right? The greatness in building, being a leader is you get to pick your team. And so you pick your team. And whether you succeed or fail is an outcome, but don't pick someone else's team, pick your team. In doing it, that is, you fit the leadership, because that's the great thing. They're yours by design, right? And so just be the leader that you wish you had, I suppose.
Yes. Oh, love it.
Fine. So maybe you've given yourself some advice. Let's land on some final piece for some other people, some advice. For our listeners trying to chart their own path in channel, what's one practical habit or one mindset shift they should take to really stand out, stay ahead, keep pushing?
Yes. Make the shift from thinking about how you could support the partner to how you can build with the partner. And I'll explain that a little bit because it's a nuance, but it's really, really important. As someone, before I went into global, I spent a lot of time in the field. And so in the field, because I'm working hand in hand with partners and customers and sales, I realized the most successful initiatives weren't built in isolation. They were co-created with the understanding of the partner's needs and their shared goals. And so to me, channel or partner marketing is really about alignment. And so understanding your partner's business like it's your own, and then showing up as a growth strategist is incredibly important. So a really, really, really simple question. When you are in that moment of either you're stuck or you're trying to build something or you're trying to influence a conversation, ask yourself the question, if I were running their business, what would I need from them? So put yourself in their shoes.
I think this is the difference between being a nice to have and a must have, right? Whereas, hey, we're this awesome marketing program and we're going to give you some budget versus like, hey, this is the uncomfortable truth you need to hear, and here's why we're going to build something that's more successful. I think the lovely thing, and this is the bit I'm sort of slightly obsessed with when it comes to the channel, sometimes having that really uncomfortable conversation where a partner's making a mistake or why we've made a mistake and we need to do better together, you get such reciprocity because that partner's going to be there, whether you're at Cisco or Microsoft or AWS, right? You're going to continue to be in the ecosystem, and that's where great reputations come from.
Agreed.
Love it. So we gave Luxy some younger advice. We gave the channel some advice. And now I'd like some advice. We always ask our current guest to recommend our next guest. Luxy, who did you have in
mind? So the person that immediately came to my mind is actually just one of my favorite humans also. Not only is she brilliant, she's also just an amazing person. Julia Chen, who leads Partner Core at AWS. I had the privilege of working with Julia. And I just remember being in awe of watching her navigate complexity in an organization, in a conversation with vision, but that she does it with so much care that you can't help but want to be part of that journey with her. So I would definitely say she would bring a ton of perspective to your podcast. And if you do reach out to her, say Luxy says hi.
Awesome. Julia, we're coming for you. Luxy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. It's been awesome.
Oh, this is so much fun. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ed.